before? Put your hands up. Okay, it's about 40%. Just noticing the trajectory of the video is illustrated by the yellow arrows, and you see Beacon Hill before, and the next day, 100% destruction of Beacon Hill, the neighborhood in Fort McMurray. So this is incredibly valuable footage. You could not have shot this for $500,000, honestly. It is really something that has multiple uses in prevention, mitigation, and preparedness response. I use it in discussing structure ignitions in terms of how did these houses ignite from that fire. I use it in validating fire smart mitigations as we draw out our priority zones in front of the structures. It's highly motivational. People are affected by what they see and recognize that could be their property. I want to today focus more on tactical response planning, so I'm going to discuss the use of tactical response planning in terms of can we increase the likelihood of the engine in this picture suppressing that spot fire on the right-hand side of the picture. I want to talk about using Type 1 engines, the big ones, versus the Type 5 engines, the small ones. I want to talk about increasing our structure protection effectiveness through wetting options, more and faster. Notice the hydrants circled in red. Notice the apparent lack of sprinklers, and one must ask, where were they? Let's talk about evacuation planning to a very limited extent. It's not entirely part of tactical response planning, but we want to plan to avoid evacuation scenarios like our motorcyclist had to endure. Now, into tactical response for WUI fires. If we consider the images of before and after Beacon Hill, I think it becomes quite apparent that our WUI fire tactical response goal has to be 0 structure ignitions. As soon as you get 1 ignition and it's not suppressed, your exponential spread 2, 4, 8, 16 takes out the community. Now, I'm going to talk about response, but I also want to make a very clear point that Fire Smart is your probably best tactical asset. If these homes where we see the spot fires ignited on the lawns were Fire Smart, these ignitions would not have occurred, or they would have been very low intensity. Now, in terms of losing control of an interface incident and turning into a disaster, you may be familiar with the disaster cycle. You get severe fire conditions, a fast-spreading fire results in multiple simultaneous ignitions, which overwhelm the fire suppression. Reduced fire protection leads to disaster. We'd seek to break that disaster cycle at the top right, multiple simultaneous ignitions. We stop that transition of wildland fuels to built fuels and reduce the likelihood of disaster. So, as responders, I want to be very clear that sprinklers and engines and all that is great, but our greatest tactical assist is responding to fire smart properties. There's the stats from Fort McMurray, 81% surviving homes fire smart, 2/3 of burned homes rated extreme. You can't get much more blatant than that. But I'm not talking about fire smarting today for a change. I want to talk about increasing our tactical response effectiveness. So rather than being overwhelmed by a fire, let's be underwhelmed and think about how we go about that. So I want to talk about tactical response planning in terms of what about that engine that drove by that spot fire? How can we increase the chance that it is assigned to suppress that spot fire? And I want to talk about planning and preparedness in terms of using a plan. Do you have a plan? Will it work? We have a wildfire preparedness guide, a component of which is a tactical response plan, and I'm going to talk very quickly about the contents of both of those plans. First of all, your wildfire preparedness guide, not a big deal, maybe 20 pages. It's critical info. It's your pre-planned operational detail. It has a number of sections talking about your various values at risk. It talks about the functional roles that we use on incidents and give ourselves a generic sort of org chart. Then we get into mutual aid communications plan, a full plan with structure protection, evac, and medical. We get into a minimum auto order list. Very important. What do you need by unit? This is based on maximum anticipated requirements. The ops chief has given you the green light to go big or go home. The fire's come to town big time. It's had 2 or 3 days to get here. It's arriving at a big interface. So what do you need? We have a section on strategies and tactics, just the basics, well described. We talk about water supply. Where is it? What is it? And how much is it? We talk about staging, the central staging and then the unit-based staging. Where is it and what are the details on it? We talk about evacuation and safe refuge areas to a limited extent because quite honestly, WUI fire evacuation requires a full plan. And that's a separate document. We talk about mutual aid resources. What, where, and who. Who are you going to call? And in terms of that, a call list that's updated and complete. So it's a pretty good little binder. When you're got a fire coming to town, you want to have this information at your fingertips. Now, that is included in this wildfire preparedness guide is a tactical response plan, which is a 3-ring binder that essentially has some neighborhood or tactical response unit specific 11 by 17 detail maps and some simple 4-page plans. The big map that we have at the beginning is a planning area, so it's about 3 kilometers out from your interface. We give it in 11:17 size and briefing size. Then we drill down into the actual tactical response units. We break our community up into neighborhoods or units. And again, it's 11 by 17 and briefing size. Very useful for organizing yourselves. Then we break the community into unit maps, and there are 10. And you can see what happens there. You break out into 11 by 17 unit maps, and these are impressive. Our GIS people really shining with the new orthophoto capacity that they've got. Really great stuff. Streets, house numbers, hydrants, pump sites, staging. It's all there, and boy, is that important for being well organized. There's also a unit plan, which has 4 pages, very simple. The first page is your unit priority values. What are they by house number or by sequence of house numbers? What's your water supply there? What kind of sprinkler sets you're using? What about alternate tactics other than sprinklers? Then we get into tactical response principles. These are triage protocols, and this is something that we really need to acquaint our interface public with in terms of, you know what, we're not always going to be there for safety and maximum resource utilization reasons, so don't be thinking that we're going to come with sirens blaring. Quite often we will not be able to respond to your particular neighborhood or situation given the condition, the non-fire smart condition that it's in. So something we all need to be thinking about more is making our public aware of triage protocols, and they're outlined in the plan. Then we get into a 3-phase approach to our tactical response. Phase 1 is pre-impingement, before the fire gets there. What are we doing in terms of sprinklers and also engines moving through the area? Phase 2 and 3 are impingement and post-impingement. Once the fire gets to the backyard line, the interface, how are we dealing with that in terms of small engines and big engines? And then post-impingement is essentially patrol. Simply outlined a couple of pages. Okay, that was our tactical response plan and wildfire preparedness guide, the quick and dirty. I want to talk about tactical response planning in terms of getting enough resources, getting the right resources, and getting them to where you want them ASAP. Oh, I think we know what that means. We have a couple of components that are key. A minimum auto order list. And so for the town of Jasper, 10 Type 1 engines, 45 Type 5 engines, and as many SPUs as we can beg, borrow, and steal. Remember that. Structure protection units, sprinkler trailers, I've already said that one, Cindy. I'll be billing you by the hour. C9, mutual aid resources. What do we got? Local in-house. Pre-planned for that, and we've also got our local mutual aid. We contact them, confirm them. Whatever we can't get locally, so to speak, we get from the Emergency Operations Center or the Provincial Emergency Operations Center. And then we get the resources. We can tell them where to report with the maps. Central staging, get your briefing package, which is the tactical response plan. Deploy the resources to the units, to the unit staging, which is identified on the maps. They get their assignments there. The assignments are quite simple. Pre-impingement, it's probably going to be structure and site prep, setting up sprinklers. On impingement, when the fire gets there, with our big engines,